Welcome to Toxic from Reddit, where real toxic relationship stories come to life. Here you'll hear true stories from people who experience toxic relationships from different perspectives. Partners dealing with cheating, manipulation, gaslighting, red flags, and all the emotional chaos that comes with loving someone who hurts you. Stories of betrayal, of finding strength to leave, of discovering the truth, of heartbreak, of healing, and the raw reality of toxic love. This is a real story, shared anonymously on Reddit. Some details have been changed to protect the identity of the people involved. Hi everyone, my name is Rachel, I'm 34 years old, and I live in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I need to tell you about the most devastating financial and emotional betrayal that has completely destroyed my life, which is that 3 months ago I discovered that my husband of 9 years had been secretly taking out loans and credit cards in my name without my knowledge or permission, that he had racked up over $250,000 in debt in my name, that he had destroyed my credit score, which was once excellent, that he had been doing all of this to fund a severe gambling addiction that I didn't even know he had, and that he had been lying to me about everything for years. And now I'm facing financial ruin, potential legal consequences, the end of my marriage, and the complete destruction of the life I thought I had built. I'm going to tell you this entire story from the beginning because there's so much deception and so many layers to this betrayal that you need to understand how I ended up in this nightmare situation. My husband's name is David, he's 36 years old, and we met 10 years ago when we were both working at the same tech company in San Francisco. David and I hit it off immediately, like we had great chemistry, we had similar interests and values, and we fell in love quickly. David was smart and ambitious and charming, and he seemed like he had his life together. David came from a good family, he had a college degree, he had a good job, and he seemed financially responsible. After dating for a year, David and I moved in together, and our relationship was great. Like, we rarely fought. We supported each other's careers, and we were planning a future together. I never saw any red flags with David. Like, he didn't have any obvious vices. He wasn't a heavy drinker, he didn't do drugs, and he seemed very stable and reliable. About 6 months after we moved in together, David proposed to me, and I said yes immediately. I was so excited to marry David and to build a life with him. We got married in a beautiful ceremony, and we were both so happy and optimistic about our future together. After we got married, David and I continued working at the tech company, and we were both doing well in our careers. We were making good money, we were saving for a house, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. About 2 years into our marriage, David got a job offer from a company in Las Vegas, and the offer was too good to turn down, like it was a significant pay increase and a promotion. David and I talked about it, and we decided to move to Las Vegas together, and I found a job at a tech company there as well. Moving to Las Vegas was a big change, but we were excited about the adventure and about the opportunities. We bought a house in a nice neighborhood, and we were living the American dream, or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see that moving to Las Vegas was probably the worst decision we could have made, because Las Vegas is a city built on gambling, and it's everywhere you go, and for someone with a gambling addiction, or a predisposition to gambling addiction, it's the most dangerous place to live. But at the time, I had no idea that David had any issues with gambling, and I had no reason to be concerned. For the first few years that we lived in Las Vegas, everything seemed fine. Like, David was doing well at his job, I was doing well at my job, and we were happy. David would occasionally go to casinos with his coworkers or friends, but I thought this was just normal socializing, like going out for drinks or going to a sports bar. David never seemed to be spending excessive amounts of money, and he never seemed to have any financial problems, so I didn't think anything of it. About 5 years ago, I started noticing some small changes in David's behavior, like he was working late more often, he was more secretive with his phone and his computer, and he seemed more stressed and anxious. When I asked David if everything was okay, he would say that work was stressful and that he was dealing with some difficult projects, and I believed him. I also started noticing that David was going out more often. Like, he would say that he was going to meet coworkers for drinks or that he had a work event, and he would come home very late. I trusted David completely, so I never questioned him or suspected that he was doing anything wrong. About 4 years ago, I noticed that we seemed to have less money in our savings account than I thought we should have. Like, we were both making good salaries, and we should have been saving a significant amount each month, but our savings didn't seem to be growing as much as I expected. When I asked David about this, he said that we had some unexpected expenses, like car repairs and home repairs, and that's why our savings weren't growing as quickly. I accepted this explanation, and I didn't think too much about it. About 3 years ago, I started receiving some strange phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and when I would answer, the person on the other end would ask for David, and when I would say that David wasn't available, they would hang up. I asked David about these calls, and David said that they were probably telemarketers or spam calls, and I believed him. I also started noticing that David was receiving a lot of mail, like envelopes from banks and credit card companies, and David would always grab the mail before I could see it, and he would take it to his office and close the door. When I asked David about all the mail, he said that it was just work stuff and bills, and that he was handling it, and I trusted him. Looking back now, I can see that all of these were red flags, and I should have investigated further, but I trusted David completely, and I never imagined that he was hiding something so devastating from me. About 2 years ago, David started becoming more distant and irritable, like he was snapping at me over small things. He seemed depressed and anxious, and he wasn't interested in spending time with me anymore. I thought that maybe David was going through a midlife crisis or that he was unhappy with his job, and I tried to be supportive and understanding. I suggested that David see a therapist or that we go to couples counseling, but David said that he was fine and that he didn't need help. About 1.5 years ago, I noticed that David had lost a significant amount of weight, and he looked exhausted and unhealthy. I was worried about David's health, and I begged him to see a doctor, but David said that he was just stressed and that he would be fine. I also noticed that David was drinking more, like he would come home and immediately pour himself a drink, and he would drink throughout the evening until he passed out. I tried to talk to David about his drinking, but David would get defensive and say that he was just unwinding after a stressful day at work. About 1 year ago, I started receiving calls from debt collectors, and they were asking for David, and they were saying that David owed money on various accounts. I was confused because I didn't know anything about these accounts, and when I asked David about them, he said that they were mistakes, that he didn't owe any money, and that he would handle it. I believed David, and I thought that maybe someone had stolen his identity, or that there was some kind of error. But the calls kept coming, and they were becoming more frequent and more aggressive. About 9 months ago, I received a letter in the mail from a law firm saying that David was being sued for an unpaid debt of $30,000. I was shocked, and I confronted David about the letter, and David broke down crying and said that he had made some mistakes, that he had taken out a loan that he couldn't pay back, and that he was trying to fix it. David begged me not to be angry, and he promised that he would take care of it and that it wouldn't happen again. I was upset, but I loved David and I wanted to support him, so I said that we would work through this together. David said that he didn't want me to worry about it, that he would handle the debt on his own, and that I should just trust him. I should have insisted on being more involved. I should have demanded to see all of our financial records, but I trusted David, and I thought that he was handling it. Over the next few months, the calls from debt collectors continued, and I started receiving more letters from law firms and collection agencies. I kept asking David what was going on, and David kept saying that he was handling it, that I shouldn't worry, and that everything would be fine. But I could see that David was falling apart, like he was barely sleeping. He was drinking heavily every night, and he seemed like he was on the verge of a breakdown. I was terrified, and I didn't know what to do. 3 months ago, I received a letter in the mail from a credit card company, and the letter was addressed to me, and it was saying that I was past due on a credit card account with a balance of $45,000. I was completely confused because I had never opened a credit card account with this company, and I had no idea what this letter was talking about. I immediately called the credit card company, and I explained that there must be some mistake, that I had never opened an account with them. The customer service representative asked me to verify some information, and then she told me that the account had been opened 3 years ago, and that it was in my name, and that the billing address was my home address. I was in complete shock, and I said that this was impossible, that I had never opened this account, and that someone must have stolen my identity. The customer service representative said that I should file a police report for identity theft, and that I should also check my credit report to see if there were any other fraudulent accounts. I hung up the phone, and I immediately went online and pulled my credit report, and what I saw made me feel like I was going to throw up. My credit report showed that there were multiple credit cards, personal loans, and lines of credit that had been opened in my name over the past 4 years, and the total debt was over $250,000. My credit score, which had been excellent, was now in the low 500s, and I had multiple accounts in collections and multiple late payments. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, like this had to be a mistake. This couldn't be real. I immediately thought that I had been a victim of identity theft, and I started panicking about how I was going to fix this and how someone had stolen my identity. But then I started looking more closely at the accounts, and I noticed that all of the accounts had been opened using my correct social security number, my correct date of birth, and my correct address. I also noticed that some of the accounts had David listed as an authorized user, and some of the statements had been mailed to our home address. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. David had done this. David had opened all of these accounts in my name. David had destroyed my credit. David had put me in debt for over $250,000. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the room was spinning, and I thought I was going to pass out. I sat there staring at my credit report for what felt like hours, trying to process what I was seeing and trying to understand how David could have done this to me. When David came home from work that evening, I was waiting for him with my credit report printed out, and I confronted him. I asked David if he had opened credit cards and loans in my name, and David's face went white, and he just stood there not saying anything. I said, "David, answer me. Did you open all of these accounts in my name?" And David started crying, and he said yes, and he said that he was so sorry, and that he never meant for it to get this bad. I asked David why he had done this, and David said that he had a gambling problem, that he had been gambling for years and that he had lost a lot of money. David said that he had started gambling casually when we first moved to Las Vegas, but that it had quickly spiraled out of control and that he had become addicted. David said that he had lost all of our savings gambling and that he had started taking out loans and credit cards to fund his gambling and to try to win back the money he had lost. David said that when he maxed out all of the credit cards and loans in his own name, he started opening accounts in my name because he thought that he would be able to win the money back and pay everything off before I found out. I was in complete shock, like I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I couldn't believe that David had been living this double life for years and that I had had no idea. I asked David how he had been able to open accounts in my name without me knowing, and David said that he had access to all of my personal information, my social security number, my date of birth, and that he had forged my signature on the application. David said that he had been intercepting the mail so that I wouldn't see the statements and the bills, and that he had been making minimum payments on some of the accounts to keep them from going into collections, but that eventually he couldn't keep up with the payments and everything had fallen apart. I asked David how much money he had lost gambling, and David said that he didn't know exactly, but that it was probably close to $400,000 over the past 5 years. I felt like I was going to be sick. Like $400,000. That was more money than I could even comprehend. I asked David where he had been gambling, and David said that he had been going to casinos, but that most of his gambling had been online, on illegal gambling websites where he could bet on sports and play poker and other games. David said that he had tried to stop many times, but that he couldn't, that the addiction was too strong, and that every time he would lose money, he would think that he just needed to gamble more to win it back. I asked David why he hadn't told me, why he hadn't asked for help, and David said that he was ashamed, that he didn't want me to know what he had become, and that he kept thinking that he could fix it on his own. I told David that he had destroyed my life, that he had destroyed my credit, that he had put me in debt for over $250,000, and that I could face legal consequences for debts that I didn't even know existed. David kept saying that he was sorry, that he would fix it, that he would get help, but I was so angry and so hurt that I couldn't even look at him. I told David to get out of the house, and David begged me not to kick him out, but I said that I needed space and that I needed time to think. David packed a bag and left, and I sat in our house alone, trying to process everything that had just happened. Over the next few days, I started doing research and trying to figure out what my options were. I learned that what David had done was identity theft and fraud, and that I could file a police report and press charges against him. I also learned that I could dispute the fraudulent accounts with the credit bureaus and with the creditors, but that I would need to provide proof that I didn't open the accounts, which would likely require filing a police report and potentially testifying against David in court. I was torn, because on one hand, David had committed a serious crime against me, and he deserved to face consequences. But on the other hand, David was my husband, and I still loved him, and I didn't want to send him to prison. I decided to consult with a lawyer to understand my options, and the lawyer explained that this was a very serious situation, and that I needed to protect myself legally and financially. The lawyer said that if I didn't report the fraud and dispute the accounts, I would be legally responsible for all of the debt, and that creditors could sue me, garnish my wages, and potentially force me to file for bankruptcy. The lawyer said that the best course of action was to file a police report for identity theft, to dispute all of the fraudulent accounts with the credit bureaus, and to cooperate with any investigations or legal proceedings. The lawyer also said that I should consider filing for divorce to protect myself from any future financial damage that David might cause. I felt completely overwhelmed, like my entire life had been turned upside down, and I didn't know what to do. I decided to file a police report because I needed to protect myself, and I couldn't be held responsible for debt that I didn't create. Filing the police report was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Like I had to sit in a police station and tell a detective that my husband had committed identity theft and fraud against me, and that I wanted to press charges. The detective was very professional and sympathetic, and he explained that this type of crime was more common than people think, and that many victims are victimized by people they know and trust. The detective took my statement, and he collected all of the documentation that I had, including my credit report, account statements, and any other evidence of the fraud. The detective said that they would investigate, and that David would likely be arrested and charged with multiple felonies. A few days after I filed the police report, David was arrested at his office, and he was charged with identity theft, fraud, and forgery. David called me from jail and he was crying and begging me to drop the charges, and he said that he couldn't believe I had turned him in to the police. I told David that I had no choice, that I had to protect myself, and that what he had done was a crime. David said that he understood, but that he was scared, and that he didn't know what was going to happen to him. David's parents bailed him out of jail, and David moved in with them. David's parents called me and begged me to drop the charges, and they said that David was sick, that he had an addiction, and that he needed help, not prison. I told David's parents that I understood that David had an addiction, but that he had also committed serious crimes against me, and that I couldn't just ignore that. David's parents said that they would pay for David to go to rehab, and that they would help him get treatment for his gambling addiction, and they begged me to give David another chance. I told David's parents that I needed time to think, and that I couldn't make any promises. Over the next few weeks, I started the process of disputing all of the fraudulent accounts, and it was a nightmare. Like, I had to contact each creditor individually, I had to explain the situation, I had to provide documentation, and I had to fill out dispute forms. Some of the creditors were understanding and cooperative, but others were difficult and skeptical, and they acted like I was trying to get out of paying debts that I legitimately owed. I also had to dispute the negative items on my credit report with the 3 credit bureaus, and this was also a long and complicated process. My lawyer explained that it could take months or even years to fully resolve all of the fraudulent accounts and to repair my credit, and that there was no guarantee that I would be successful in disputing all of the accounts. I also learned that even if I was successful in disputing the accounts, the damage to my credit could last for years, and that I might have trouble getting approved for loans, credit cards, or even renting an apartment. I felt completely hopeless, like David had destroyed my financial future, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. I also started the process of filing for divorce because I knew that I couldn't stay married to David after what he had done. Filing for divorce was heartbreaking. Like, I had loved David, I had trusted him, and I had thought that we would be together forever. But David had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I knew that I could never trust him again. David tried to contact me multiple times, and he sent me long emails and text messages apologizing and begging me to give him another chance. David said that he had checked himself into a gambling addiction treatment program, and that he was getting help, and that he was committed to changing. David said that he loved me, and that he wanted to save our marriage, and that he would do whatever it took to make things right. But I couldn't forgive David. Like, what he had done was too big, too devastating, and too unforgivable. David had lied to me for years. He had stolen my identity, he had destroyed my credit, and he had put me in a financial hole that I might never be able to climb out of. About a month after David was arrested, he had his first court appearance, and his lawyer negotiated a plea deal. David pleaded guilty to multiple counts of identity theft and fraud, and he was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and he was ordered to pay restitution to me for the full amount of the fraudulent debt, which was over $250,000. David was also ordered to attend gambling addiction treatment and to have no contact with me except through our lawyers. I was relieved that David didn't have to go to prison, because despite everything, I didn't want to see him locked up. But I was also angry that he got off so easy. Like, 3 years of probation seemed like a slap on the wrist for what he had done. The restitution order was essentially meaningless, because David didn't have any money, and there was no way he would ever be able to pay me back $250,000. My lawyer explained that the restitution order was mostly symbolic, and that I shouldn't expect to ever see any of that money. Over the past 2 months, I've been slowly working through the process of disputing the fraudulent accounts and trying to repair my credit. I've had some success, like some of the creditors have agreed to close the accounts and remove them from my credit report, but other creditors have been more difficult. I've also been working with a credit repair specialist who has been helping me navigate the process and advocate on my behalf. The credit repair specialist has told me that it's going to be a long road, but that eventually I should be able to get most of the fraudulent accounts removed and my credit score restored. I've also been going to therapy to help me process everything that's happened, and my therapist has been incredibly helpful in helping me work through the anger, the betrayal, and the grief. My therapist has explained that what David did was a form of financial abuse, and that it's just as serious and damaging as physical or emotional abuse. My therapist has helped me understand that I'm a victim, that what happened was not my fault, and that I have the right to be angry and to protect myself. My therapist has also helped me work through the complicated feelings I have about David, because even though I'm angry at him and I can never forgive him, part of me still loves him and feels sad about the loss of our marriage. I've been thinking a lot about how I missed all of the signs and about how David was able to hide his gambling addiction and his fraud from me for so long. I've realized that David was very skilled at lying and manipulating, and that he had created an entire secret life that I knew nothing about. I've also realized that I was too trusting, and that I should have been more involved in our finances, and that I should have questioned David more when things didn't add up. But my therapist has told me that I shouldn't blame myself, that David was the one who chose to lie and to commit fraud, and that I couldn't have prevented it. I've been thinking about the future, and about how I'm going to rebuild my life after this devastation. Right now, I'm focused on resolving the fraudulent accounts, repairing my credit, and finalizing my divorce from David. I'm also focused on my career and on making sure that I'm financially stable and independent. I've had to make some difficult financial decisions, like I've had to sell my house because I couldn't afford the mortgage on my own, and I've moved into a small apartment. I've also had to cut back on expenses and live very frugally while I work on paying off the legitimate debts that I do have, and while I save money for the future. It's been a huge adjustment, like I went from living in a nice house and having a comfortable life to living in a small apartment and struggling financially, but I'm determined to get through this, and I'm determined to rebuild my life and my credit. I've been thinking about David, and about what his life is like now, and honestly, I don't really care. David made his choices, and he has to live with the consequences of those choices. I hope that David is getting help for his gambling addiction, and I hope that he's learned from this experience, but that's not my responsibility anymore. I've been thinking about other people who might be in similar situations, who might have a partner with a secret addiction, or who might be victims of financial abuse or identity theft, and I want to tell them to pay attention to the red flags, to be involved in their finances, and to not ignore warning signs. I want to tell them that if something doesn't feel right, they should investigate, they should ask questions, and they should not just blindly trust their partner. I want to tell them that financial abuse is real, that it's serious, and that it can destroy your life just as much as physical abuse. I want to tell them that if they discover that their partner has committed fraud or identity theft against them, they need to protect themselves. They need to file a police report, and they need to take legal action, even if it's difficult and even if they still love their partner. I've been thinking about the lessons I've learned from this experience, and there are so many. I've learned that you can never really know someone, no matter how long you've been with them or how much you think you know them. I've learned that addiction is a powerful and destructive force, and that it can turn good people into liars and criminals. I've learned that trust is fragile, and that once it's broken, it can never be fully repaired. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, and that I can survive even the most devastating betrayals. And I've learned that I deserve better, that I deserve to be with someone who is honest and trustworthy, and that I will never again ignore red flags or make excuses for someone's bad behavior. Thank you for reading my story, and if you've been through something similar, if your partner had a secret addiction, if you were a victim of financial abuse or identity theft, if your partner destroyed your credit or put you in debt, or if you've had to make the difficult decision to report your partner to the police, I would love to hear how you dealt with it and where you are now. I'm still in the process of rebuilding my life, still working on repairing my credit and resolving the fraudulent accounts, still processing the betrayal and the loss of my marriage, but I'm determined to come out of this stronger and to never let anyone take advantage of me again.